This morning I talked about losing self-control or not having self-control, losing control. And there's just so many things to talk about in that area. What brought me to the point of talking about it in the first place was over the past few weeks I've been looking at the subject of add to your faith, or what's been normally called the 7 virtues. And so the first thing that's said there in 2 Peter chapter 1 is add to your faith virtue, add to virtue knowledge, add to knowledge self-control. So that's what's up next. And I've called it add to your faith, each one of these things, ever since I've ever read those 7 virtues. Add to your faith virtue, add to your faith knowledge, add to your faith self-control. So we look at these things, and they are important for us to understand because we need every single one of these things. We don't need to just look at them and say, oh, that's a nice list of things to do. I wish I could do those things. We need to somehow put these together in our lives and be able to do these things. And self-control may be one of the hardest of the bunch to do, because we look at that idea of self-control and we think, well, I have very little self-control. And what area are we talking about? Some people might say, I have very few filters on my mouth. I've just been that way. I don't know what to do about it. I just have very little self-control when it comes to saying things. I speak my mind. That's another way we say that about having self-control. Instead of saying I don't have self-control, we say I speak my mind. And so there's lots of ways that people say this and describe themselves in this way, and also try to get away with not behaving these ways. So I look at this first idea of self-control and think, I'm losing control. And I think of someone in a car who has lost control of the car. And where do they go when they lose control of the car? They either go into the ditch or run into a tree or run off a bridge or into another car or something. Or I mentioned airplanes because we got a pilot in our congregation. And what happens if the pilot loses control of the airplane or jet? It's not a good event. It's not a good thing at all. We want control. We like to have control. And sometimes we carry on the idea of having so much control that we try to control other people around us instead of controlling ourselves. We think, well, I can't control myself, so I'm going to control everybody else. So there's lots of things that are involved in this idea of self-control, and we need to keep in mind that some of these things are just plain old difficult to do. Sometimes spouses want to control each other. Sometimes parents want to control the kids. And I know there's something to that part, because we want to try to keep the kids under control. We don't want them just running wild, although some people do that. Sometimes friends even want to control other friends and make them do or make them not do something to their satisfaction. But what we really need is self-control. In Acts chapter 4, verse 25, we just read that a few moments ago. Justin read that for us. It says that Felix was afraid when he heard Paul talking about these specific subjects. And one of them was righteousness, one of them was self-control, and one of them was the judgment. And he trembled at that because of the fact that obviously he didn't have much righteousness, and he apparently didn't have much self-control, and so therefore the end result was he knows that he's going to be judged and condemned because of his behavior and his lifestyle. And a lot of people are like that. But there needs to be self-control in marriage. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5 talks about the relationship between the husband and wife and in their intimacies. And it talks about those things in ways that tells each of those spouses to love each other and to give into each other rather than trying to be a burden to one another. And so it describes to us that they need to love one another in the right way and give themselves to each other and not hold back from each other, because that could lead to other problems in their marriage relationship. It needs to be self-control also in that same chapter, in verse 9, just a few verses later, in the relationship of someone who is not married yet. But if they, in fact, it says if they can't wait, then instead they burn. It's describing a burning with passion rather than burning in hellfire. Although that might be a result if the person doesn't have some self-control in that relationship. But it's describing to us the idea of self-control in both of those relationships, and tells us we understand from Enhanced Strong's lexicon that self-control is the virtue of one who masters his desire and passion, especially his sensual appetites. So it uses a word there, sensual, along with appetites, letting us understand that there's more than just a physical relationship between two people that we're dealing with. Appetites also references those things which we eat. But we could have an appetite for power. We need to have some self-control in that area as well. We might have an appetite for anger. We need to have some self-control in that area. There's all sorts of things that deal with this subject of self-control. And we need to have some self-control. We need to work on self-control. And the first thing I want to talk about is why. It's why it's important to have some self-control. We think of all sorts of things, but one of the things that we see in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular, is it found in Titus chapter 1. And this idea of self-control has to do with elders in that passage. And it tells us that they have to have certain qualifications, and one of those things is self-control. And if we had somebody that was an elder that was just kind of out of their mind all the time, or just doing wild things all the time, would we want that person to be the one that leads us? That would be kind of scary, having someone that just kind of scattered in their mind and doesn't do anything that's giving anybody any kind of peace or security. What we come to this place for ought to have to do with our peace with God and our peace with one another, and even our peace with ourselves. I've got a picture I want to show you. Here's this kid looking at a cookie jar. Doesn't it look like he wants to have one of those cookies? I had another picture. It had a sign on it that says, "Please don't eat." And when we see these things, you see a plate of these on the table, aren't you going to want to get one of those? And then you have the sign there that says, "Please don't eat these." What? That's just wrong, right? So we gotta have some self-control sometimes, and this is one of those things that we look at and we think, wow, I don't know if I could handle that. I mean, it's in this jar. All I have to do is take that jar off and reach in there. It's that easy to do. But if Mom says wait till after supper, or wait till after dinner, or wait till after lunch, then what do you need to do? Well, you need to wait till after the meal, whatever it is, because that's what Mom said to do. No matter why Mom said to do it. But I want a cookie. Well, have some self-control. I don't want self-control. I want a cookie. You know that I'm talking like a small child, but don't we as adults have that same attitude sometimes? We want what we want, and we think we have to have it. Whatever it is. It could be something edible. It could be something monetary. It could be something possessive. It could be anything. Maybe it's a person. So we get the impression that there is good reason for us to have self-control. There is good reason for us to have self-control. I mentioned this morning to the early congregation that there is a story about some kids, and I may have mentioned this to most everybody anyway, that were in this kind of a situation, and they were told they had a plate out on the table and there was one cookie on it, and they were told, if you don't eat that cookie, when we get back, we'll give you more cookies. We'll give you 2 more cookies. And so, of course, having each individual child in this test, they found that some kids were willing to wait, obviously. Some kids were not willing to wait. Some kids would eat the cookie, but then, of course, the result was they didn't get 2 more cookies, even if they wanted them. Well, I've got 2 more cookies, but you ate that one, and I told you that the rule was if you don't eat that, when I get back, you can have that one plus 2 more. All you have to do is wait. So they found later that these kids that did not eat the cookie and waited for the more cookies also did the same kind of, I don't know why I do that, same kind of thing in life, And those who waited for the extra cookies did better in life. And those who did not do as well in life. They got better grades, they had better jobs, the ones who waited, because they were patient, they had self-control. So it's important for us to have self-control, because, not just simply because you might get more cookies, okay? It has to do, you can take that down now. I don't want people staring at the cookies and getting hungry. In Galatians chapter 5, we read about the fruit of the Spirit. And in the fruit of the Spirit, one of the parts of the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And we have to understand that all of these parts is something that we need. So I'm not putting down any of the rest of them. All of them are something we need. Oftentimes people look at the fruit of the Spirit as being plural, fruits of the Spirit. But Paul didn't say fruits of the Spirit. And I hear that all the time, fruits of the Spirit, but it's really fruit of the Spirit, and all of these things are involved in this fruit. We tend to think of it like there's apples and oranges and peaches and pears and plums and grapes. We think like that about the fruit of the Spirit, thinking, well, I don't need any pears, and so therefore I've got apples and grapes. I'm good. I've got fruit, so I'm good. I don't need the rest of those things. But that's not what it's like. It is fruit singular. We need all of those things. I'm not saying that we need all fruits that are fruits from the trees or vines. I'm saying that we need the fruit of the Spirit. And we need all of those things in our lives. Self-control just happens to be a part of that fruit. And if you understand where that fruit comes from, you understand that these things that are in that list of things are not something that we do naturally. They're not something that we do because we have a great talent for all of those things. It's not because we're really smart and have these abilities. It has to do with the idea that the Spirit is involved in those things, and that God is involved in those things, and Jesus is involved in those things. So if you walk in the Spirit, these things that are called the fruit of the Spirit will be the end result in your life. Now, you may get better at things, but the reason why you get better at any of those individual things is because you're walking in the guidance of the Spirit. And where do we get that guidance? We get that guidance from the Word of God, which the Spirit inspired so that we could have. So all of these things are important because of the fact that self-control is not something that we have naturally. It's something that we desire to have. And the way we obtain that is by trusting in God our Father and His Spirit and His Son, so that we can have those things in our lives. And another part of that is practicing those things, which means the second part that we need to talk about is the application of those things. When we deal with the subject of self-control, we're also dealing with the idea of temper. That's one of the things that was in the list of things for elders. He can't be someone who's a hothead. I remember one elder saying, just admitting right out that he's a hothead. He said it himself, and everybody knew that he was a hothead. And my question was, why is he an elder if he's a hothead? If he's this hothead that he claims to be, and everybody else knows it. Why did he become an elder in the first place when the Scripture clearly says, don't let this person become an elder? It's a strange thing. What we have to have in the eldership are examples of the good qualities that are there. When we see the kind of person that's listed there in somebody that has been a faithful Christian for a large number of years in their life, then we have somebody that's a good example for us to follow, and that's somebody that would be qualified to be an elder. We see somebody who has these horrible mannerisms, these horrible characteristics in their life, and why would we ever put that person in as an elder? We don't need to do that. We need to put someone in who has some self-control, but one of those things is self-control that qualifies a man to be an elder. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 23, I mentioned that already. What I want to talk about here is temper. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, tells us, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. What is that telling us? It's telling us, first of all, that there are circumstances where anger is the appropriate behavior. And what we have been taught all of our lives is that anger is not a good thing ever, that we should never become angry. And that's not the truth. What we should do, though, is have our anger under control. That's what we need to do. He says, be angry and do not sin. So it is what we do with that anger that makes it whether we have control over the anger or we are sinning with that anger. I see Jesus, I can't help but bring up Jesus, cleansing, what they call cleansing the temple. That's the title of that little section of the Gospels. It doesn't ever say that he cleansed the temple, but what it says is that he went through the temple and he turned over the tables of the money changers and he picked up a whip and he started beating people with it, driving them out of the temple. Does that sound like somebody that was angry, or does that sound like somebody that was angry? I think it was probably somebody that was angry. Jesus was angry that people were treating God the way they were treating him, and they were treating the people of God the way they were treating the people of God. What were those people doing? They were changing money. Is there any problem with changing money? No, not if you do it in a kind way. Well, does that mean you just swap it out and you don't get anything from it? No, that doesn't necessarily mean that. If a person is there and able to do that kind of thing, that can become a business, but just don't gouge them with it. Do you remember when gasoline became $4 or $5 a gallon right after 9/11? You remember that happening? Prices just went sky high. Prices before that time were less than $2 all the time. They were $1.25 or something to that effect, and they jumped up to over $4. They were fined for doing that, the ones that did that. And a lot of people got their money back because of what happened there. But what was going on? What's that gouging mean? What does that mean? It means people are being rude to people. That's what that means. Jesus wouldn't have liked that either. He does not like us gouging other people. He does not like us paying these exorbitant prices for a goat that we could use for a sacrifice because it's coming up to the Passover feast. Oh, I'll get these people because they've traveled all this distance and they didn't bring their own goat to sacrifice, and so they'll want to pay at least double of what they would have paid someplace else or growing their own. Maybe I'm providing them a service. I'm providing them a convenience, and so therefore it's worth twice as much as it's worth. That doesn't make any sense. What that does is make people greedy. Jesus was pretty upset at these people, and he had a right to be. And there are times when we have a right to be angry, but we need to be careful that we don't sin in the process. We don't need to murder people. We don't need to poison their water. We don't need to be publicly destructive because we don't like something. James talks about, in James chapter 3, talks about the tongue. In verses 1 through 12, he tells us all sorts of things about the tongue. Some he talks about being teachers, being given stricter judgment. And he says, if anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man. And I want to point out another verse later on. But no man can tame the tongue, so therefore nobody's perfect. So why try? That's what we get from that idea when we start looking at those verses in that way. We pick out this verse, we pick out that one, because nobody can tame the tongue. And it says the person who can tame his tongue is a perfect man. Nobody can tame his tongue, so therefore nobody's perfect. And then the end result is, the conclusion is, why even try? Let's don't even do it. Let's just give up on it. Let's give up on this whole thing called Christianity, because nobody can be perfect anyway, so why even try? And yet, we have this verse about self-control. We have this verse about self-control. We have another verse about self-control. We even have James in this passage telling us to control our tongues. Why is he telling us if we can't do it? Why is he telling us to do it if we can't do it? If we look at that context a little bit better, look at the biblical context of these things a little bit better, here's one truth that stands out pretty clearly. We can't do it on our own. No man can do it on his own. But with the help of one another, and more importantly, the help of God, when we walk in the Spirit and the Spirit is helping us, we can have all of these fruits if there are more than one. There's only one, really. I'm just picking on people who say there's fruits. We can have all of those parts of the fruit of the Spirit if we walk in the Spirit, but we can't have any of them to a good degree if we don't walk in the Spirit. Self-control is one of those. Dealing with the tongue is one of those. Temper is one of those. Temptation is another one of those. Do you think that you're going to be able to overcome every single temptation that comes your way without the help of brothers and sisters in Christ, or without, more importantly, without the help of God or His Spirit or His Son? No. None of us can do it. Listen to this verse. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, chapter 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except such is common to man. What that verse is telling us is that there are temptations that have overtaken us. And what we need to know is that everybody has that problem. That's the first part of that verse. Everybody has the problem of dealing with temptation. It's not anything new. You say, well, you know, I really have this anger issue because, and you name it out, and nobody else has ever experienced anything like that whatsoever. Wrong. Many people have experienced that. Well, I have this temptation with this habit, whatever this habit is. You fill in the blank. There's so many of them. I have this bad habit that I just can't get over it, and nobody understands. Oh, you're telling me that nobody else has had that habit. Right. No, that's not right. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. Common to everybody else. But look, here's the answer. The very next phrase. But God is faithful. And listen to this. The reason why we know He's faithful is because of this. Who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. Well, you know what? I really feel like that I'm not able to handle this temptation. Why? The reason why is because we don't want to handle this temptation. The reason why is because we like this temptation. The reason why is because, well, somebody else is doing this temptation. The reason why is because we want to blame, and we want to be the victim, and we want to make everybody think that we can't do it. We can't on our own. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Why doesn't He say that you will bear it and you will get through it? Because some people like the temptation, some people want the temptation, some people enjoy the temptation, and they don't care what anybody else thinks. They're going to have that temptation, and we could throw in some extra stuff there, couldn't we? We could get excited about this thing. We could get angry about this thing. Well, you know, my dad was this way, so therefore I'm this way. Well, you know, it's just my way of doing things, and so therefore I'm going to continue doing things this way, no matter what anybody says. And what we have done to ourselves is we have planned to sin. We have planned to fail in our temptations. What we need is self-control. It's important for us to have self-control, and it's important for us to understand that we can have self-control with God's help. So how do we cultivate it? We cultivate it by working at the job of self-control. Consider it a job. Just work the job of self-control. Stay at your post. Maybe you've heard stories of people who have stayed at their post when everything was going down. Everything was falling apart. I think of those fellows that climbed the Twin Towers 19 years ago. Can you imagine running into danger rather than running away from it? And that's what they did. They ran into danger knowing full well that it's possible that that building could come down on them while they're trying to rescue others. I read one story where this guy, he was not one of those fellas that were trained to go in. And he ran in and brought out 4 people, ran in to get the 5th person. And that's when it fell. Why? Why would we run into danger knowing full well that kind of thing would happen? Because something is more important than ourselves. That's what self-control is. We are putting the needs of others or the need of the occasion ahead of ourselves. We know this job needs to be done, and so therefore we're going to do that job no matter what it does to us because it has to be done. That's what self-control is. We stay at our post. We run into danger because of those kinds of things. This is more important than even my life. If it comes to that, that's what I'm going to do. That's what self-control is. How do we get to that point? How do we cultivate that ability to do that? Part of it has to do with us training ourselves. Do you think that doctors and nurses are able to go into the emergency room and help people without ever having any training whatsoever? Well, they might be able to help a few people just by common sense things, but sometimes there's some pretty bad stuff that goes on in there. Those EMTs that run to try to help people in their emergencies have to face some pretty bad stuff. The reason why they're able to do that is because they train themselves. Somebody says, well, I can't do that. No, you can't, but with help you could. Well, I can't do math. I can't do helping people in emergencies. I can't do not cussing because I've cussed all my life, and so therefore I can't stop that. Yes, you can if you get some help. I have a problem with whatever the habit is. Throw out the habit. You can get help. All of us can get help, and all of us need to get help. So, everyone who competes for the prize, this is 1 Corinthians 9:25-27. Everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. What's temperate? Temperate is self-control. This boxer doesn't go get a great big meal just before he goes in to box his opponent. He's going to have a steak, dinner, potato. Oh, no. He's not going to do that. Why? The first time he gets hit in the stomach with that other man's glove, he'll throw that up all over the ring. I know that was a good picture for you, but you understand. He's not going to do that. Everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now, they do it to obtain a perishable crown. This leafy crown that they had was made out of real leaves, and they put it on their heads. And those people got that crown. And how long did that crown last? Not very long at all. It would, just like you pick some kind of a flower around, it's going to stay for a few days, and then it's gone. You keep it watered as long as you can, it might go for a week or so. But eventually it perishes. And that's what happened to their crown. And they ran 26 miles in a marathon. They jumped hurdles. They fought lions. They fought gladiators. All the things that they did. Whatever it was that they did those things so that they could get this wreath on the top of their head for a few days. I won the wreath. Look at that. For a few days. Paul says they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Wouldn't it be much more important to have an imperishable crown? Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. We have to work the job. We have to stay at our post. Because it's that important, and we have to keep it in perspective that it's not just something that's simple. It's not just something that's frivolous. This is something that is eternal. James was talking about the tongue, and he used the the little tongue compared to the body as compared to a rudder on a big ship. The rudder is small compared to the big ship. It's just a small thing, the tongue is. But it's been used to tame. Nobody can tame it? Yes, you can. With somebody's help, with God's help. You can overcome that temptation? Yes, you can. With God's help, with others' help. What we need to do in order to cultivate this, in order to build this self-control, is to get ourselves out of the way. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, to all his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So we first of all deny ourselves. If we want to work this plan, if we want to be able to cultivate this plan, we have to keep it in perspective, and we have to dethrone ourselves and put Christ then on that throne instead of ourselves. Galatians chapter 2, verse 20 tells us, Paul says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Paul was able to claim that reward, that victory, because of the fact that he got himself out of the way and put Christ in his personal throne instead. And that's the only way we're going to be able to have self-control, is by doing that very thing. Once we do that, then we are able to serve others very well. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. You may have been there already, so if you're still there, I'm going to read a couple other verses from that chapter. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning at verse 23. This is going to be an interesting thing for you to hear. Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's in all its fullness. So he's describing to us meat that's been sold at the marketplace. God made that meat. Go ahead and eat it. If any of those who do not believe invite you to dinner and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no question for conscience sake. But if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it, for the sake of the one who told you and for conscience's sake. For the earth is the Lord's in all its fullness. See, the meat itself has nothing to do with the situation. It's not the meat. It's the belief system of somebody else. Somebody else believes that this meat was offered to idols, and therefore it's been blessed by false gods. They don't think it's false, but you know they're false because they're idols. Idols, that's a good word for idols, aren't they? They just sit there. They're idle. I know that's another word, but what I'm saying is that these idols meant something to some people, and you're corroborating that belief. You're helping that belief. You're helping that person to continue to believe in that kind of thing. So he says, don't eat it if they say it. If they don't say it, then eat it. Don't ask anything. So he says, conscience, I say, not your own, but that of the other. For why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? But if I partake with thanks, why am I evil spoken of for the food over which I have given thanks? Therefore, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to the Jews or to the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. So everything that we have on earth is meant for our needs and sometimes for our pleasure. So it's fine to eat all of those things. It's fine to do all of those things. It's fine to have all of those things. But when that thing becomes something that comes between you and God, or becomes between somebody else and God, and you're hindering their relationship with God, stop it. Whatever it is. Again, fill in the blank, whatever it is. We talk about so many different things. Fill in the blank. If somebody's offended by that, stop it. Stop doing that. Now look, somebody says, well, I'm offended because you drank my water. Well, don't drink their water. Drink somebody else's water. You take care of that. The water's not the problem. The problem is you drank their water. Don't drink their water if that offends them. Or get some water someplace else. You ate a piece of watermelon off of my plate. I'm offended by that. Don't eat off of somebody else's plate. I know I'm talking very simplistic, but what I'm telling you is that whatever it is, we could talk about the food we eat, the clothing we wear, the houses we have. If that's something that can possibly offend somebody else, don't ask any questions about it. But if it becomes a problem, don't let that problem lose somebody's soul. I know this is a tough discussion because there's so many things that we like. What could it be? Anything. It could be anything. In another place, Paul says, I will never eat meat again if it's going to cause my brother to stumble. Do we have that attitude toward those things that cause people to stumble? Or do we say, it's my right? See, therein lies the problem. It's a matter of attitude toward all of these things. When we start putting something, valuing it much more than we value someone, there's a serious problem right there. We need to get things out of the way. Now, here's another thing. If we value someone more than we value God, there's a problem too. So we need to be very careful not to allow that to happen. We need to have self-control on our desires, whatever they might be. Not allow our desires to be that which is our life. We can't say that, oh, I live for this, whatever it is. I keep thinking of somebody saying, death by chocolate. There's even a company by that name, I think. And they'll say that this cake is worth dying for. No, it's not. No, it's not. Nothing on earth is worth dying for except another person. Nothing is. It's the principle of the matter. The principle needs to change. The principle is we need to have self-control, not desiring things more than other people and other people more than God. We need to have self-control. We need to add to our faith self-control. It takes practice, it takes work, it takes submitting to God, but it can happen. Every one of us can have it. If you are willing to submit to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, I urge you to come to Jesus and be baptized into His name so that you can have the forgiveness of sins, and then you might be able to add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge self-control. If you need to obey the gospel initially, or you need our prayers, we're going to stand, we're going to sing a song, and I hope that you will let it be known so that we can take care of what you need.